Yami Inui Med, thanks for the invitation to come here and speak to everyone today. It's not often you get to spend 60 minutes talking about your passion and work, and although the following slides only covers the last 2 years or so, I'm hoping there's enough interesting content here to keep everyone interested or entertained for the next hour or so. Normally I'd be happy to wing the talking, but I don't trust myself to stay on track of time or even on point, so I'll be reading from a loose script. I also don't tend to make these many excuses before talking, but I'm operating on less than a few hours sleep, so please bear with me if I seem to space out at any moment. Anyway, so let's get into it. I should probably stand on this side, huh, so you can actually see the screen. So the talk I'm going to give this morning looks at the role of reality capture in art, architecture, heritage, and how it can be used as a tool for visual and experiential communication in the public forum. The idea is to cover as much detail as possible, but I'll mainly be doing this by closely examining a number of projects that I've been working on, and alongside a few examples from a pioneering practice based over in the UK as well. So the image that you can see here on the cover slide is actually of a small peninsula reaching out over the wetlands up north in Belmont. However, it's not actually a photograph, and it wasn't taken by a drone. It is actually a render of a 3D scan taken of the site, and it's made up of millions and millions of points. I'll go into this a bit more detail later on. Is there any chance we might be able to get the lights a little bit dimmer, by any chance?
Although, just bear with me if we go into disco mode for a second while I find that.
I'll continue on though. So I'll just quickly introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Chirag. I'm 25, graduated with my Master of Architecture from the University of Auckland just a little over 2 years ago. Born in Rajasthan, India, but I moved here when I was 11, so I feel very connected to this place in the city. Although I tend to feel pretty out of place whenever there's a waida being sung. I missed out on primary school here, so I never had the chance to learn the lyrics to Tira Manya Iwi. Anyways, my thesis here gave me the opportunity to experiment with LiDAR machines and 3D scanning, a skill that I honed and took forward after graduating and moving into practice. So I work as an artist as well as an entrepreneur, and having just had a few debut exhibitions over the last year, I've also launched a startup called Arc Digital, which I'll be talking a little bit more about. This is where I'm based, the aviary. It's a little hidden studio tucked behind one of the alleyways on K Road. And it's where we operate ARC. So ARC is an acronym for architecture and reality capture. Reality capture is just basically a term for 3D scanning or any form of 3D scanning or 3D capture. And we launched ARC as a way of shifting our expanded skill sets into a kind of structured practice. Our clients include the likes of Auckland Council and Design Works, through to architects and project managers, and even small commercial businesses like Fagburger in Queenstown, if anyone has been down there. We're a twofold entity, really, so maybe moving into a threefold entity in the near future. We're a commercial practice, so we offer 3D scanning to architects, engineers, the creative industry, the film industry, but we also operate in the arts with independent projects, as you'll soon see, and we're looking at ways to move into research with other emerging technologies, and perhaps working with or alongside tertiary institutions in that regard. A quick overview of what we'll be kind of going through today. I'll just give a quick sort of introduction to 3D scanning, what it is, how it works, what we do. We'll then be looking at how this is applied in a number of ways through personal projects as well as commercial projects. Starting with one I've been leading for the last 3 years called Into the Underworld, which essentially looks at the suburban lava caves underneath Tamaki Makaurau. Honestly, one of the most remarkable relationships between our built environment and the natural landscape. We'll then quickly look at some incredible projects from pioneering UK practice ScanLab to get a glimpse of the near future, I guess, of 3D scanning. So some of you might be familiar with 3D scanning already. There's actually quite a few different methods. Most geologists and most professionals are familiar with aerial LiDAR, which is done mostly through drones and through helicopters. Then you've got your desktop scanners, which are pretty much the opposite in scale and capture very small scale objects at a very high level of detail. Then you have the terrestrial LiDAR scanner. That's us. That's what we specialize in. It's a wee little sci-fi looking instrument, which we basically pop it down on a tripod. And the process works by basically firing a laser. So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. So basically it's like a laser measurer but on steroids. So what it does is it shoots a photon. The photon hits the surface and it comes back to the scanner. Using very, very, very precise instruments, it knows how long it's been since the photon fired away from the scanner and then came back. So it uses the speed of light to understand how far it's gone. And then what it does is it creates a virtual dot. So you can kind of see the pattern of dots that it's making on the teapot there. Obviously it's doing that virtually. And then it does that again, a little bit higher or lower, depending on which way it's moving. And then again, till it's doing it about 1 million times a second. And then it spins around on its axis in 360 degrees. So it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but essentially what it's doing, if we were to kind of collapse that 15 minutes into a single moment, is it's basically shooting out a sphere of, say 10 million points, and essentially recording the world around it. So it can't see behind walls. What we're looking at here is a 3D scan done in someone's living room. You can see there's a black circle in the middle of the room, and it basically, that's where the scanner sits on the tripod, so it can't measure anything underneath it. It's got a kind of 270-degree arc. And it leaves behind this kind of circle wherever it's gone. So you'll kind of see this in all the images that are about to come. They kind of pervade our work. They're these little kinds of spots underneath the tripod where the scanner doesn't really capture anything. So zooming in a wee bit, you can sort of see the objects within 1.5 meters there, something like the guitar and pillow. We're starting to get points closer than about every millimeter. Every kind of pixel you see in this image is essentially a point that we've 3D scanned. So they're accurate to within a range of about 1 to 2 millimeters. The machine itself easily copes with a room like this, maybe 10 meters long by 4 meters wide. But the range on the instruments we tend to use can actually have a working range anywhere from 60 meters to 333 meters. So zooming in a bit more, it kind of gives you an idea of the detail of the scan. So we build up these models out of millions and millions of precisely measured points. But as well as being precisely measured, these points are also colored. So the scanner that we use essentially has a built-in camera. So we take I guess it's similar to a photograph. It's a panoramic photograph. And it does this right after the scan. So it's a two-part process. It captures depth data, and then it captures color data. And then back in the studio, we assign the color data onto the points. So in this way, we're capturing the light conditions in exactly the same way that they are in when you are in that space. So it's quite a time-based activity in a way. So when we're looking at this living room here, we're not just looking at the living room the way a surveyor might look at the living room. It's basically the exact moment of time that the space existed in when we captured that space. So the scanner can't see through stuff, obviously. So you can see in this image there's a lot of shadowing, mostly by the sofas and kind of the shelves and furniture there. So the way we get around that is we start to link scans together. So we take a scan, it takes 10 to 15 minutes. Then you move the scanner, and then you take another scan, and it takes another 10 to 15 minutes. And then we use a whole series of different references to link those scans together later in the studio as well. So there's another scan of the bottom floor, another couple of scans on the first floor of the building, and then we started to creep outside. So first scan on the roof, second scan on the roof, first scan on the street, second and third scan on the street. So we're looking at maybe half a day on site on that particular job. In this instance, it was a surveying job, recording the details of the heritage building for some structural renovation. But once you have the model, you can then scrutinize and analyze the compiled point clouds. So you can separate the components, for example, and pull them out to analyze the structure and habitation. So that's 3D scanning in a nutshell, really. So I hope that's kind of given an overview of the process. I'll talk a little bit about the project I've been involved with and how this is applied in that way. I'll kind of leave 3D scanning behind first and give a bit of context of what this project is about. So this is Peter Crossley. Peter is a speleologist. I'm sure some of you or many of you are familiar with his face. He's basically known as a lava caveman or the caveman in Auckland. So for the last 50 years, Peter's been going around documenting lava caves all across the isthmus. They've existed for thousands of years, but what's happened is over time as the city expanded, it's essentially grown over these caves. So a lot of the caves have been filled in, they've been destroyed. And in other cases, there's been this incredible new relationship that's formed, sometimes great, sometimes really awkward, between the built environment and this other world. And so you'll see these kinds of thresholds in a bit, but these are the kind of spaces that you get. So this is Weary Mountain Lava Cave down in Weary in South Auckland. It's the longest lava cave in Auckland. It's 290 meters. And the redness of the interior kind of gives you an idea of the nature of this cave versus limestone. So these caves are volcanic. They're not formed over hundreds of thousands of years. They're formed almost instantly in geological time. So what's really powerful about these, I think, is that when you're in these caves, you get this completely new reading of our own landscape. You start to read the sublimity and the kind of power, I suppose, of those eruptions. And these are, this one here in Three Kings is about 2 to 3 meters under the surface, and above the surface is several houses. So I'll talk about that a bit more later on as well. Again, the fossilized ancient lava flows, really amazing. Tree roots, not stalactites. So they're Pahudakawa tree roots that make it through the cracks on the surface. Some of them grow long enough to go back into the ground, and then they tense up again, and you can play them like a horse string. Not that you should, because you can break them, but it just goes to show that there's this kind of, I guess there's some level of life that thrives on this cave environment, because they obviously absorb the moisture in the air. So I thought that was quite incredible. But these are the kinds of surface conditions that they exist under. 104 Landscape Road. Ratcliffe's Cave, this is Onehunga, so there's a cave that's accessed by a manhole, and most of these shop owners aren't aware of it. This is one on Landscape Road again in Three Kings. So these owners they didn't find the cave, they knew about the cave next door, and then when the property went on sale, they bought it, subdivided it, sold the house in front, and then converted the entrance into a future grotto with steps and handrails and lights. So pretty remarkable, really. This one's in Mount Albert. So it's actually accessed through the street front garage. And then on the other side of the garage, there's a giant rock fall. So whoever built the house obviously knew about the cave and built a sliding door up against it to make it his own. That's a water tank from the 40s. So left over from, I guess it was planned as an air raid shelter of some kind. It's still there. It's rusting away. Kind of gives you an idea of scale. So these are the kinds of awkward conditions you can get, as opposed to the feature grotto or the, garage entrance. You get entrances like this, which, lead into caves like this. And of course, because of that proximity to the, the surface and the built environment, these are the kinds of cases you're getting now. So essentially, this has all happened in the past. It doesn't really happen so much anymore. But road builders, developers, etc., come across a hole in the ground, or they come across a cave. And for road builders, it's a matter of convenience. So they kind of go, oh great, this is a convenient place for me to either dump the rubble in, or to kind of get rid of my stormwater, or it's essentially a hole in the ground that they can relegate waste to. For developers, it's a lot more complicated. If you're a developer and you come across a hole the size of a cave when you're digging up the ground, you're legally obliged to report it. But of course, if you report it as an archaeological site in some way, then you've kind of lost your investment, essentially, or it's at least on hold for several months. So there's one, there's no awareness, but there's also little incentive for developers to actually report them. So the caves that we know about are the ones that either have been found through government projects or through thresholds that have always existed. Peter seems to think there's as many caves which have or used to exist but have been destroyed, and twice as many caves that still are not discovered. It's the same thing again. A lot of rubbish. Dating back to the 20s and 30s sometimes. A park bench. I don't know how that got down there, but there's a park bench in a cave. But you can kind of make out the pile of rubbish down there as well. So that's on Shackleton Road, again in Three Kings. This is, you know, the middle of suburbia. So people have known about this. Locals have known about this, obviously, because they've dumped waste down there. A brick retaining wall has made it through. So just going through how they formed, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Hochstedter's map. Basically, wherever there's a volcanic lava flow or a region where lava flows have gone through, that's where lava caves can exist. So the way they form is lava flows down from the volcano when it erupts. We've got a particular type of lava flow in Auckland made out of basaltic lava, which is called pahoihoi. Essentially, it dries up on the surface a lot faster, but it insulates the layers underneath. And so when the volcano stops erupting, the lava vacates, and so it leaves behind a void, and essentially you get a cave. That's it in a nutshell. I'm sure the geologists in here are kind of, you know, they explain that a lot better than I did, but the reason you get natural entrances, from what Peter's told me, is natural collapses or through man-made activity where people have drilled into the ground. So we applied for a funding grant. So I mean, I met Peter a couple of years ago, and he told me that there was that he was basically trying to bring the caves into the public forum in some way. So he'd done a documentary, and he'd been on several media outlets, and the issue tended to be that it was interesting, but there wasn't really that kind of connection being fostered, which is usually fostered by actually going out and experiencing the caves. Often because there's a level of myth and rumor that precedes these sites, and so they're not really believed to be real. But you know, I think in order to imbue some level of stewardship, there needs to be some level of connection. So that wasn't quite there. And the other situation was that the caves were slowly falling into disrepair, and there wasn't really much record of them prior to the last 10 years. So we got a funding grant from Auckland Council to essentially start archiving and recording these caves and capturing them using a LiDAR scanner. And the idea was to be able to locate them against the surface, against their thresholds, but also to archive them for posterity, essentially. That was the initial, I guess, the initial you know, outset, but once we started getting these kinds of images from the data, so this is from a single scan of one cave. This is a low-res scan. Same thing here. You can kind of make out the legs of the tripod as they kind of spread out. Same thing here, but in terms of I guess an exhibition context, or in terms of making the landscape visible, these kinds of images weren't really doing the job, or weren't really kind of revealing anything new. So the idea was to see if we can kind of look at it in a slightly different way. Of course, this is part of the process. So essentially, when you had two scans, you had to connect them together. On the surface, we usually have some level of reference, some level of straight walls and rectilinear objects for us to kind of connect two scans, but under the surface, not so much. So it was quite a steep learning curve trying to get this sorted at the start. But essentially, once you've got a full compiled scan, and you look at it in a particular way and you process it, you can get results like this. So this is of that same cave that I showed you earlier with the feature grotto. So this is the house at the back, and they've installed steps down into a platform and steps and a handrail down into the cave. The cave actually goes on for twice that length, but it immediately reveals that relationship that we're trying to reveal, trying to show, right? Which is that relationship between our surface and this other world and how close it is. So just looking a bit closer at that image. This is the level of detail that we get. So you're picking up almost every millimeter, really. And so each of these images kind of have their own character. So this is one in Hebron, which is a lot shorter. It's actually behind Hebron Christian College for anyone who lives in the area. And then one in Mangere on Ambury Road. So this one's got 2 thresholds. It was actually expanded by explosives back in the 80s. But there's a family who lives at the back, and they've got children who essentially jump down into the cave every weekend. And they've got a little shed out the front with Halloween costumes and decorations set up for Halloween. So, you know, people know about this. They do use these sites. So this is that same cave with the manhole over at Ratcliffe's in Mount Wellington. Bull's Paddock over in Ambury Farm Park. This is quite a peculiar site. So this is out in Otuatawa in the stone fields. It actually used to be a burial cave, so it's quite tapu. We worked with iwi to access this cave. So there was a karakia, and we were accompanied by Kamatua inside the cave in order to capture it. This one on Ngāti Street, One Tree Hill, was discovered only in 2015 during the Whenua pipeline project. So when they dug up a trench, the earth kind of just caved in, and they kind of went, well, what was that about? And they investigated and found a 90-meter long cave under the houses. So whenever you see a bright cluster in the image, that's where a scanner was placed. So you kind of get an idea for, or a trace of how the image was captured. And the reason they're brighter is not because there was a light source there, but because there's actually a higher density of points in that particular area, in that locale. So this one is the one behind the garage. So it becomes quite important looking at these images in this way, because it's the fastest and easiest way to communicate, again, that kind of connection that we've formed. It's also about, in a way, kind of capturing the narrative of this landscape, I guess. I mean, there's, like I said, there's a level of myth and rumor that precedes these sites, and for a lot of people, it is kind of, you know, it's uncanny and it's fantastical. So it captures that in some way, but also it's also important to capture the textures of the caves, because it's about conveying that these are in some way unique to our region. They're lava caves, and they're not limestone caves. So they have their own kind of characteristics. So this one under Shackleton Road runs for 120 meters behind the driveway, and you can clearly make out where the cave used to be flat across the ground, and when the road builders built the road above it, found the cave and dumped all the rubble into it. And then there's a manhole that actually goes down into the cave. So once we had gone down to the end, we came back through and up the manhole, and you can see us resting kind of just on the perch there while the scanner was doing its thing. So the idea with the exhibition was really about, well, the idea behind the project was not only to archive and record it, but also to bring it into the public forum in a way that, well, obviously in an exhibition setting, but also in a way that allowed for a space of reflection and meditation in some way. So Into the Underworld, Mahi Rarowhenua, the underground works, was a project or an exhibition that first took place in December. It just had its second showing at Silo 6 again just last month in October. Sorry, in September. And basically it's an exhibition of around 15 large panoramic light boxes, some up to 6.5 meters wide and up to 2 stories high. So this kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the light boxes. It was important to portray these images at a certain scale because they are made up of these millions and millions of points. And the whole kind of, the power of the image is that it's irrefutable. You know, in this kind of post-Trump, post-truth era, it's quite important to relay that in some way, right? Because at first glance, of course, a lot of the images do look quite fantastical. But to convey that actually these things are actually really just millions and millions of measured and recorded points of reality, it makes the sites a lot more discernible. So of course, once you've got a 3D data set, we're only looking at 2D projections of that data set. This is also part of the exhibition, and it's a fly-through of the cave that we actually recorded the music for the exhibition in. So we gathered about 150 guests and witnesses alongside, to witness Peter Hobbs, who's a talented multi-instrumental composer with a quartet of violinists and cellists. And basically composed and recorded a background score for the exhibition in the cave. But what's kind of remarkable about seeing the landscape in this way is that it allows you to be immersed. And it also gives you a glimpse into what the data set actually looks like. So this is not what the data looks like when it's in its raw form. It is processed. But that doesn't mean that anything's been manipulated. You can kind of make out at certain points, certain gaps in the ceiling. Not right now, but a little bit later on. And you find rocks on the ground with the exact same curvature and shape that would match that further down the cave. So you get a sense of movement and time as well. So we're at a point where we're looking toward the exhibition. So we know it's not possible to always get every curator at the exhibition, nor is it possible to really kind of relay everything about the exhibition through photographs and through text. So we decided to capture the exhibition using a 3D scanner and basically used an online WebGL platform to host the 3D model or a version of it that allows you to walk through it on your phone, your tablet, or your desktop. Some of you may or may not have seen this already. So in this version, in this way, it's kind of like Google Street View on steroids. But then it takes it to another level when you can look at the entire exhibition in 3D as well. So this is all online through your browser. You can do this through your phone or your tablet as well. Okay, so applications are, well, if you remember, the act of scanning a building is essentially capturing it in that moment in time at a very high level of accuracy. So essentially a digital replica or at least a representation of it. So a lot of construction and architectural work actually involves renovations. They're not all new builds. And refits of existing buildings. So most of these either don't have any records of the building or they're completely out of date. So typically what happens is that an architect would either go in themselves or send one of their grads in, and the grad would then measure the space up using a tape measure and a pencil and a sketchbook. I know, because I've done that many times before, and there's a lot of assumptions that come into play with that, and there's a lot of rework that can happen down the line when things aren't drawn correctly. With heritage work especially, you know, it's incredibly important to get everything in a high level of detail, which, you know, may not always be practical or economic to do by hand. So that's where we come in, and essentially what we do is we record the spaces as they are. And we tend to deliver this as a 3D model. So it's a piece of information that can go straight into BIM, design programs that most architects and engineers are comfortable with. We've also kind of taken the survey drawing to hopefully another level where we're not just surveying the kind of, you know, the position of the walls in the building, but also, you know, the post-it notes and on people's books and the title on those books and the pieces of fruit in the fruit bowl. There's a kind of strange level of invasive truth about these snapshots, but it's also, you know, of the building, but also the occupation of the building. So on a kind of commercial basis, we deliver these embedded 3D data sets, which can also come with 2D plan drawings and 2D sections, as well as 3D BIM models. We can also infer and create meshes from the 3D point cloud data. So we then turn that into, you know, potentially a 3D print, for example. So another example of work we've done for an architect and project manager for a warehouse refit on Nikau Street, and converting that into a comprehensible CAD drawing as well. So, you know, these point clouds are heavy data sets, but they can be brought into these BIM packages, but they can also be brought into the likes of SketchUp as well. And we do that in-house as well. So, you know, we either deliver the actual data set, or we deliver the BIM model or the SketchUp model if that's what the client prefers. So that's an overview of that same point cloud. So in the same vein as the exhibition, we offer a online walkthrough with all of our deliverables. And it becomes quite a powerful tool for the architect and for the project manager, because you know, the architect generally works on a daily basis with these kinds of you know, projected drawings and BIM models, which the client may not be as familiar with. But you know, these kinds of drawings and these kinds of models are something that the client can kind of can speak to and they live in, right? For the architect themselves as well, it's a way of kind of avoiding to have to go back on the site, right? So, you know, if it's, oh, what have I done here? Let's go back. It's a way of having to avoid that time sink, right? Because you're always going to forget things. You're always going to forget to measure things. And so having something like this on hand is incredibly useful. So you can view it as a floor plan, as a dollhouse. You can view only one floor. We'll separate it out. And again, this is all just, you know, through your browser. So it uses WebGL, which is really handy because it means if you're on site somewhere else and you get a call from the client about something, you need to check the site, it's right there in front of you. So this was, that became extremely useful for a project down in Queenstown, where the architect actually is based over in Wellington. So we were commissioned to fly down and capture this beautiful house over in Frankton, and you know, generated the models that we needed to do for the architect from that as well. I won't go into the model of this. I think I think the other ones have given you a pretty good idea. So this is, if you recognize it, Fagberger. So this is a comprehensive point cloud scan of the roof, as well as the you know, the premises next to it as well. For those of you who don't know, Fagberger's open 23 hours a day. So we had a 60-minute window, well, a 45-minute window to capture the inside, and that was, it was crazy. It was a bit of fun, but you kind of get a sense for how important it is that they open at 8 a.m. because by 7:45 they've got a queue of 20 people out there, and I was working on site throughout the entire day, and that queue never ran down. It just got bigger and bigger until about midnight. So other types of commercial work, design communication. So we work with design agencies as well. So this is a project up north that I was telling you about. So we're not actually looking at a drone photo here. We're looking at a point cloud scan. So the fact is that once you've got a 3D point cloud, a digital replica, you can look at it in any way you want to. The effect of what's lit up and what's not and what's in shadow is entirely dependent upon where the scanner was placed. So what we're trying to find with this exercise, with this project, was a sense of brand or identity of this site or of this land or of this landscape. So we went out and you can kind of see where we place the scanner, so you can see the black circles there and over here as well. We captured the street and then went out towards the wetlands, the mangroves. And you can kind of see those bright cluster points where we had placed the scanner as well. The thing about point clouds is that there's a level of transparency to them, which gives them, it gives them quite a ghostly feel. I think there's an advantage, in certain applications for that aesthetic. I've seen it being used quite cleverly by the UK practice that I'm about to go into. So some sectional images and elevational images of that head that we're trying to identify or capture. So we looked at things in the macro scale, things from above, and trying to identify what makes this place. So then we started heading out to the wetlands. And that's where we started to come across these, unique geographical features in the mangroves. So, these are some of the grass that kind of comes up. Maybe it's tussock. I'm not really sure what the label for it would be. But what was interesting is that the land kind of rose up just enough to block the light from the scanner. So the scanner was placed somewhere in the corner here, and where you get shadows is where the scanner couldn't see anything or the light couldn't reach. So what's happened here is that the water or the ground's actually elevated up slightly to block the scanning light. But what you end up with is this kind of amazing result, which defines this kind of boundary that isn't really there, but it is now from the scan. So these kinds of moments, these abstract moments, started to form some kind of identity for this landscape. And stepping out, you get these other moments that you can identify again. With the point cloud, with the 3D data set, you've got a version of it, and the raw version is a point cloud. You can then go further and turn that into a mesh. So you generate a solid mesh from that, which is at a surprisingly high level of detail. And again, you can bring out these moments of identity from that. So you can kind of make out the houses in the bottom right image there, for example, or the bridge in the bottom left. So just to finish off, I want to talk a bit about ScanLab and some potential future projects. So ScanLab is it's a pioneering UK practice by a Bartlett graduate duo, Matthew Shaw and William Trossel. They've been playing around with LiDAR machines since about 2012. And they're essentially experimenting with the machine to figure out how far they can push it to apply it to novel applications. But one, I think, quite relevant use was of the shipping galleries. So, let's see if I can play this video. So, this is actually, I'll make that full screen. Is that playing? Yeah. So this is part of the Science Museum in London. And it's one of the few large galleries in the Science Museum which a lot of people hold quite dear. Just from the length of time the exhibition has been on. It's been on for half a century. And the kinds of pieces it holds. So these are the shipping galleries, which is, they've since been decommissioned, and they're about to make way for a new kind of exciting exhibition on information and communication. So these guys were approached to create a digital archive of the museum and focus on the entire space, which includes thousands of pieces, that are displayed in the exhibit. So what you're seeing is basically, models and replicas that are handmade by those who are probably now granddads, and replicas of engines and steam engines and anything you can think about that's associated with, maritime, I guess, at this gallery. So they spent close to a week after hours, essentially 3D scanning the space and capturing all the pieces. So what they've got now is a complete digital replica of what was. This is only an animation or a fly-through of that data, but what you can do with that data goes and extends beyond that, right? This is no longer there. This is already, I think they've already opened up the new exhibition because this would have been in 2015 that they recorded it. But what's amazing is that you can start to isolate some of these pieces. So you can isolate the individual artifacts and exhibits just from these large-scale 3D scans. So what that means in terms of an interactive experience is that you can have an application or a web page, for example, that allows you to search by database or even, walk through the exhibitors if you were actually there, potentially go into VR in the future when the technology catches up. So here we have a plan. So as I was explaining earlier, once you have the data, you can take the drawings from whichever view you fancy, and you can start cutting bits up, and you can start revealing the inner workings of the gallery to your heart's content. Some other shots that were extracted from the model. So this is another example of that. This is the Bartlett exhibition. So, being Bartlett graduates, they scan the exhibition every year, and it's basically an exhibition of architectural models and drawings, illustrations, etc. That comprises a year's worth of work at the Bartlett School of Architecture. And so once they've scanned it, they create an application or a web page which you can access and then peruse the drawings and peruse the work in some way. So for example, this is the interface they've got on their application that they release every year. And essentially with that application, you have a macro view where you can actually pull a section plane, an invisible section plane, down through the point cloud and view it from that isometric angle. You can also isolate individual units being their studio groups, and peruse them from a certain angle. But you can also, of course, get quite close to the drawings as well. Because of the level of detail that the scanner is actually capturing these pieces in this work, you've got what is essentially apart from the physical characteristics of the medium, you've got what is essentially a digital replica of that object, of that created piece. Take that as a cue. So another way where this is used, not so much for exhibitions but for heritage work and making that visible in a public way. Barn 2B, so restoration work going on with this site. I think it's over, I'm not going to pretend to know where it is, so I'm not sure where it is, but they've essentially, as part of the conservation and preservation work, they've captured the building as it was before the works took place. And then what they've done is they've created this application that allows you to scrutinize the building in a number of set ways. So, for example, if you do a drawing set, you've got the ability to essentially go through different elevations and plans, sections and that sort of thing. You can also do essentially I guess kind of like a kit set build-up, because once you've got the model, you can isolate the components, and so in this way you can add layers and understand how the building is put together. You can also, in the same way, use a kind of gradient section line and a visible section plane to look inside the building by dragging your finger across your iPad. And finally, the other way of applying this is through artifacts and objects, not just buildings, of course. So an example being scanning the engine of the Cessna Skyhawk, and same kind of interactive experience, being able to cut through that and seeing inside of it. Now, that's just one example. So I'll end with this video, which kind of gives you an idea of where they're headed, and I think where this technology is headed in terms of its application. Personally, I've always felt that VR is an individual experience, and how that works in an exhibition context is something I still haven't figured out, and is the reason why I didn't pursue it for the Into the Underworld exhibition. But it's still quite powerful. Cool. I think I'll end it here. These are the kinds of output and content that you can generate from a 3D point cloud and that we generate. So obviously you've seen the static images, the visuals. You've got fly-throughs and animations and videos. You've got the actual point cloud itself. BIM models, which you can use for architectural applications. The mesh, which you can use for 3D printing. Online virtual walkthroughs, which you've seen. Digital applications, so apps on your iPad, tablet, web apps. Exhibitions, installations, AR, VR experiences, you name it. So while we're based in 3D scanning, the content we produce is heavily varied. Cool. That's me.